Good morning on this Sunday, May 29th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. The stage is set at the top of the ticket for Georgia's gubernatorial and U.S. Senate races. Also, the political fallout in Georgia from the Uvalde Elementary School shooting. And many Cobb County voters say no to cityhood. Melita, Phil, Theron, and Martha are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Governor Brian Kemp sailed to victory Tuesday, setting his sights on Democrat Stacey Abrams, who launched a new ad about how she brought Republicans, Democrats, and independents together.
Let's keep chopping, everybody. Thank you very much.
Governor Brian Kemp easily won the Republican nomination, getting vindication after being attacked by the former president. Kemp turned his attention to the upcoming rematch against his Democratic opponent, Stacey Abrams.
We got to knock doors like we've never knocked them before. We got to make more phone calls. We got to talk to more of our friends and our neighbors. We got to get everybody in this fight.
The way we fight is by turning out more voters, by calling out voter suppression from Brian Kemp and Brad Raffensperger, but not just laying there.
Let's prove them wrong again and go 2-0 on November the 8th.
The Kemp-Abrams rematch is expected to be one of the most closely watched and expensive races in the country. Phil, to you first. I mean, this was quite a victory for Governor Brian Kemp. The Insider Advantage, your own poll had him at 52%. So what happened? I mean, does this mean that Republicans are ready to move on and not look back to 2020?
Yes, in fact, the Insider Advantage did have him winning. So let's put it that way. I don't think anybody expected 70%. Trump country went for Governor Kemp. And that was the big headline there. Why? You know, we've always said that it was Kemp country in the Republican primary, and the rest of it in Metro Atlanta was Kemp, and then the rest of it was Trump. So the big shift came, I think, because a lot of Republicans felt, hey, I think Governor Kemp is the best one to go against Stacey Abrams in November. And I want to say this, too. Governor Kemp had a great legislative session. We've all talked about that. He had not just legislation beloved by conservatives, but by the center politically. And finally, I think people remember this, and it's remembered well. He opened up the state early, and business people loved it. And so kudos to Governor Kemp.
Well, Theron, with such a huge win for Governor Kemp and this being a midterm election year that's really looking good for Republicans, what does Stacey Abrams need to do heading into November?
Well, she's got to do exactly what you just showed on air, and that is that she's got to expand the base, and she's got to go to the middle, because I believe the middle is wide open. Now, what you saw in the Republican primary is that clearly David Perdue was the most conservative. I mean, he had the most conservative, most divisive former president, Donald Trump. And he forced Governor Kemp to sort of move a little to the right as well. So I think that opens a lane for Stacey Abrams to do what she's doing, which is she solidified the base by her advertisement, right? So she's come out, she's reminded voters who she is and what she plans to do. But this new ad, and going beyond talking about Medicaid expansion, starting to talk about crime and education are things that she's got to start talking about.
Martha, how nasty and ugly is this going to get?
It's going to get nasty and ugly, but I will disagree a little bit with Theron on that. I think the governor moved more to the center because David Perdue was in the right, and so he's already in that lane, that business lane in the center, and that Stacey Abrams has got to reclaim that. I think the challenge that Stacey's going to have is the difference between her ad persona and when she's on the stump persona, because the ads are with all due respect, Christmas lights and puppies, and she's looking nice and she's getting along with everybody and it's family and she's dancing in the kitchen and she's doing all of that kind of stuff. But her speeches are very angry and they are very much on the progressive left side of things. So she's got to find that lane where she's going to go and actually be who she is in her ads.
Melita.
I believe she'll find that lane, and she'll find it very quickly. I also think it's very interesting that the national and international media eyes were all focused on Georgia. I had a friend who returned to the States from London yesterday, and she said on Wednesday, leading on British television was the Georgia governor's race and the fact that Kemp won being a repudiation of Donald Trump politics. And so I think it's very interesting that these Georgia results are seen as a way for governors and others to pull away from the Trump endorsement. Kemp became the star of the National Republican Governors Association at their meeting this week. So it's going to be very interesting to see what kind of bubble, ripples from the Georgia results resonate in other states.
We saw that happen in Virginia as well, Theron.
But I will say this, and it's going to probably not shock Martha and Phil, but you got to give Governor Kemp some credit because what he did, I remember I talked about the two T's, it was Trump and temperament. Well, clearly the Trump effect didn't work in the governor's race, and we'll talk about other races where it did work, but he didn't let David Perdue get him off his game. Even in the debates, that first debate was very heated, but the second, third debate was not as bad, and so it's going to be different in this general election because I think Stacey is going to be a little bit more poignant.
Yeah. All right, I want to move on and focus on the U.S. Senate race and really talk about the events of this week in Uvalde, Texas. I mean, it's hard for us to comprehend these horrific events, and there's a lot of political fallout here. Martha, we talked about kind of the true vetting of Herschel Walker begins now, and he appeared to stumble on the issue of gun control this week.
I think catching him, that original one as he's walking through the ballroom after his speech.
But you are a U.S. Senate candidate.
I understand that. I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying I can see you being off your game in that particular situation, not expecting the question, but he does need to be ready for it. He needs to be ready to talk about it, and I think that he will be. It was interesting, Andrew Gillespie, who's a political scientist at Emory, who leans a little left, I lean a little right, and she thought the speech was pretty good and that it's going to be a nice matchup between two preachers.
Well, Theron, let's talk about that scripted teleprompter speech that he read from. Do you think we'll be seeing more of this kind of measured, scripted Herschel Walker?
Well, let's just walk our viewers through the sequence of events, right? So clearly he had been practicing that speech for a very, very long time because he refused to debate any of his Republican opponents. He goes and gives the speech. I thought the speech was okay. And you got to think about it, the bar was so low because we haven't heard anything from Herschel. We haven't heard him be able to articulate sentences. And so this was the first time that he's able to at least talk about why he's running. And then he comes down and totally just fumbles the response on gun control. And then he goes on Fox News, where you can't be any safer Republican than Fox News, and literally makes one of the most bizarre comments about what he plans to do around gun control. And so I think the difference is this. The debates are going to be definitely a clear contrast between a leader in Raphael Warnock, who is representing all Georgians, who's experienced, who's going to be running on his record that he's very proud of, versus a man who clearly I think is unfit and not prepared to be a candidate for U.S. Senate.
Phil, I know you want to weigh in here.
Well, he is prepared and he is fit, and that's a dirty shot. But I understand that Democrats are very worried with his candidacy. He took a page out of the Biden book. Teleprompter. You got to clean up some of the stuff afterwards, and you always defend Biden when that happens. So let's defend Warnock. And by the way, I don't see anything wrong with Herschel Walker saying I'd like to read any gun control bill, because the Democrats always put in the strictest requirements and erode the Second Amendment. So I think it's better to do an early stumble early.
Melita.
Well, with all due respect, Phil, you're cleaning up what he said. What he said was, what I like to do is see it in everything and stuff. He also said and suggested on Fox News, what about getting a department that can look at young men, that's looking at women, that looking at social media? So off script, he is not quite so eloquent as the scripts prepared for him to read from teleprompter.
But Melita, let me ask you this, because Herschel Walker's strategy will be to tie Senator Warnock to the Biden administration. How does Senator Warnock counter that?
I think he counters that by the good work he's doing for Georgia. I think you also see Democrats claiming the economic recovery from COVID money that was passed by a Democratic federal administration under Biden's leadership, but doled out at the state level by Republicans. But Democrats claim that should claim the credit for that.
Biden is so unpopular, he needs to, in my opinion, step away from a lot of the Biden policies, especially Warnock's war on fossil fuels with inflation raging and gas prices going up.
Time will tell.
Yes, it will. We'll leave it there. Coming up, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger also vindicated surviving the wrath of Donald Trump with an outright win on Tuesday.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
One of the other most talked about races on Tuesday was on the Republican side for Secretary of State. Incumbent Brad Raffensperger had a big win, avoiding a runoff against Jody Hice. Martha, should these wins signify a message to former President Trump about a potential run in 2024?
I think Georgia was a turning point in a lot of ways because we are one of the states. Of course, Texas had a runoff, but Texas and Georgia, you got to look at these runoff results. But I got to tell you, for Brad Raffensperger, he went into the lion's den. He spoke at every group around the state. He said, give me 12 minutes to explain my side, and then I'll take every question. And then I said it last week, I think these 100,000 poll workers that were hired, went back into their communities and talked about how it was running, how good the elections are being run. And then, of course, there was the crossover vote that happened. But again, in a county like mine, you always have about 8 to 10% crossover. So I'm not sure how much of an impact it had there.
Theron doesn't like me to talk about that crossover vote, but obviously Democrats helped Brad Raffensperger. And I heard someone say that, in Brad Raffensperger, he is what you want in a Secretary of State. He's an engineer. He didn't really, he's obviously conservative, but he didn't really get in that political fluffle.
Well, Laura, you did earlier this week talk about the Democratic vote, and I did some research, so you're right. There were some Democrats.
Say that again?
No, hold on. But you're right. But what I've done, because I do my research,
yes,
is that I said on the air, how Democratic are these Democratic voters? And what it showed to me is, and shout out to Ryan Anderson with GeorgiaVotes.com.
Yes, he's great.
Talk to him. It showed that these are Democrats who oftentimes switch primaries. So it wasn't like these people like Melita and I who decided all of a sudden we're going to go pull a Republican ballot to vote for Secretary of State Raffensperger. These were moderate Democrats who go back and forth. But look, I'm going to call balls and strikes. I thought Brad Raffensperger was in trouble months ago.
We all did.
I thought he was in trouble a few weeks ago. And Phil and Martha did a really good job of telling us, no, the polling numbers are looking better. So for him to survive everything he went through, you got to give a man some credit for that.
Phil.
Well, I think that Larry Sabato, the political scientist for Virginia, he's no conservative, but he estimated that with Raffensperger getting 52%, that's roughly about maybe 28,000 votes. So, yeah, the Democrats put in Raffensperger. I would tell my Republican friends, though, that you probably should stick with Raffensperger this November. It's better to be with the devil you know than the devil you don't know, B. Nguyen, the Democrat.
You can respond to that because it is B. Nguyen versus D. Hawkins-Hagler in the Democratic runoff for Secretary of State. So what do you anticipate happening there?
Well, there are two things. First, I think Charlie Hazlett from Trouble in God's Country estimates the crossover vote could have been as high as 50,000 and even up to 75,000. And I think his analysis was spot on. I will say that B. Nguyen is endorsed by Georgia Win List. I think she's going to make a formidable candidate. Now she still has to survive a runoff. Stacey Abrams has endorsed her. The two women have long been friends because B. took the district that Stacey had once represented in the Georgia House. B. was very loyal to Abrams in 2018, passing out signs and lit packets from her front porch throughout that campaign. So I think B. Nguyen will make a very interesting contrast and a successful one to Raffensperger in the fall.
Quickly, because I want to get to these congressional races.
Very quick. You don't want to be in first place going into a runoff, which is where B. Nguyen is. And secondly, Raffensperger went from the guy no one would have lunch with to winning the other night.
And what I'll say really quickly, I don't disagree with anything you said about B. Nguyen, but I think we got to be fair to former State Representative D. Hawkins-Hagler. For her to actually get into this runoff, for her to strategically, do what she could with limited amount of resources, don't underestimate her.
I wouldn't. Let's try to get to as many of these congressional races as we can. In the 7th congressional, it was Lucy McBath over Carolyn Bourdeaux-Melita.
Well, I think there's no question that the gun money helped Lucy McBath here. The ads were hitting
gun control money.
The gun control money, the gun safety money, because she's such an advocate. Sorry about that. But those ads were hitting at the same time as all the news reports out of Buffalo, and then the news reports out of Texas started the middle of Election Day. But Carolyn Bourdeaux has nothing to be ashamed of in losing, and I certainly think she has a lot of strong talents that will quickly be put to use in some way in the policy area.
Phil, let's go to the 6th because it's a runoff between Jake Evans and Rich McCormick.
That's right, and you've got to give credit to Rich McCormick. He piled up a very interesting vote. Jake Evans was kind of lucky to get into the runoff there. I think that it's, as we all know in runoffs, turnout. And so Jake Evans is the Trump-endorsed candidate, but a lot of Trumpers like Rich McCormick, so it's going to be a toss-up.
Well, this is one we kind of chuckle about, right? It's Mike Collins in the 10th versus Vernon Jones, who we've always known as a Democrat from DeKalb County.
That's right.
And here he is in the 10th.
Well, I think this is a congressional seat, Lori, where the Trump endorsement clearly worked. I mean, Vernon Jones don't have to live in the district in Georgia to run, but hasn't really spent a lot of time there. Goes into a district, gets out of the governor's race, and switches to a congressional race with the Trump endorsement, and actually did pretty well. And so I think that now, how does he build upon that momentum? Does Trump go out and double down and triple down on his endorsement? And at a time where the turnout really is going to be low, and he's in a very conservative district, I'll be very interested to see how it goes up against Matt Collins.
Martha.
You're going to see social conservative groups mobilize against him. So that's one of the things he's going to deal with.
Okay. All right. We'll leave it there, everybody. Coming up, Georgia's Department of Driver Services notices a huge uptick in voter registrations after they made changes to the website. We'll discuss after the break.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Before we get to the state's automatic voter registration story, I would like to discuss the lieutenant governor's race quickly. Phil.
Well, Burt Jones has won without a runoff, and he was the Trump-endorsed candidate, so that was a victory for Trump country, and it was interesting to see the votes he got as opposed to Perdue, who obviously faltered and got defeated. And so I think that that's going to be quite a lineup. Butch Miller, kudos to him, but it just wasn't in the cards for him.
Theron on the Democratic side.
Really quick, there's a runoff between Charlie Bailey and former council member and former Congressman Kwanzaa Hall. Charlie Bailey definitely had a lot of money, put a lot out there, has been a Democrat for a very long time, but Kwanzaa Hall has a tremendous amount of name recognition, serving on school board, city council, and brief stint as congressman. That race, basically, a lot of folks were kind of wondering how it was going to turn out, but clearly Kwanzaa was able to put together a really good coalition. And the other two races, quickly, I mentioned, I know we'll talk about later, is there is a runoff for labor commissioner on the Democratic side and a runoff for insurance commissioner.
We'll get to those in the coming weeks. Now, let's get to this story. According to the AJC, you all chuckled at this one, the state's automatic voter registration system was broken for more than a year. After the Department of Driver Services fixed it, voter registration skyrocketed to more normal levels. Kudos to reporter Mark Nisi on this story. I have to give him credit. Melita, your take on this?
Well, I think it's going to be very interesting to see what efforts are made by both parties, but especially the Democratic Party, to find all of those people who were failed by this system, as many as 60,000 a month for a year and a half, and whether they can get registered between now and November.
Martha?
They'll get registered, and I don't think anybody was failed. It was a mistake, and the mistake was fixed, and it's out there, and we saw record turnouts, and we continue to do that. There's no voter suppression.
Farron, this is a big mistake in a state like Georgia, where all eyes are on us.
It was fixed.
Only when it was thrown in their face to fix it.
Exactly.
Only when it was thrown in their face to fix it, and it took time.
Because Martha, you and Phil would be up here saying that it's a conspiracy, these radical Democrats are trying to steal the election. If it was a different
You don't know me very well.
You don't know me at all.
But no, seriously. The thing about is what Melita said is that I think we're on the outlet that have been talking about this consistently. Literally thousands of people, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people.
60,000 a month for a year and a half.
There you go. I know she's going to come with it. And so I think this is what's going to happen. One, it clearly was a conspiracy. I don't think it was a mistake. But then secondly, where Republicans went around talking about higher turnout, and I give credit, Republicans showed they were really motivated in this primary.
Democrats had huge turnout too.
Hold on, that's where I'm going.
Democrats prove the conspiracy.
Hey, let him talk.
Democrats had huge turnout too, and that we believe that if people who are moving to this state and people who live here, if they continue to have the opportunity to get registered, that goes in our favor. And so I think it's a conspiracy. Someone should be fired for this mistake. And the fact that we're kind of laughing it off is just really, really tells you about why people have issues with the confidence in our elections in the state.
Phil.
Well, I don't have confidence in a lot of the elections in this state either, so I'll go along with you on that one. But I think that whoever the IT people were that didn't report it ought to be fired. I'll go along with that.
Well, Phil, I want to come back to you because let's talk about Fulton County elections. You've been very critical of them in the past. I have to say, all was pretty quiet. No major problems of long lines, late night tallies. I mean, I'd say it was a success.
That was actually the shocker for me on election night. And where's Kathy Willard? Is she?
Kudos to Kathy.
Yeah.
I mean, she was on TV.
But there's always a but here, Lori. Let's look for the general election where maybe there'll be conspiracies up there, and I don't know. But
Well, you got to get a shout out to Fulton County. I mean,
Yes.
they got
I'm going to lead it real quick.
This is what happens when you put women in charge. Kathy Willard is chair of the elections
I can
board,
agree with
and
you
a
on
woman as the Nadine Williams as interim director of the staff.
and
Three
also
of
an
us will
ally of
agree with
Stacey.
that.
Also an ally of
All right,
Stacey Abrams.
let's go to Cobb County, where voters rejected efforts to create the cities of East Cobb, Vinings, and Lost Mountain. Martha, what happened here?
I think the people didn't want it. I mean, they got the vote and they
clear.
didn't want it. I mean, I think there's so much turmoil right now that people didn't want anymore. And I think that's really, it's a very simple explanation. There's no conspiracy or any deeper meaning. There was just, they didn't want it.
No, it was how it was handled. So go back to, it was basically a group of legislators coming together. Clearly they had been working on this for multiple years. It was concocted in a way that it wasn't transparent. It snuck up on a lot of people in Cobb County. But I got to give a big shout out to Cobb County Chairwoman Lisa Cupid. I had some very personal conversations about how she was being attacked and how the county was being attacked. But even when this measure failed, she showed a great amount of professionalism, amount of grace, and how she basically said, look, there are some things that we're going to look at the county we can do better. But this was nothing but a coverted effort that was concocted behind closed doors. And it was
Another conspiracy.
And it was definitely a conspiracy.
It was Republican legislators who see the Republican Party losing control of Cobb County, and they wanted to complete their fiefdoms by starting these new cities. And it's an example of the voters showing that they prefer to be listened to instead of being told what to do.
And Phil, we should mention also, you can comment on that, but 80% of Republicans said yes, they should be able to vote on Buckhead cityhood.
Well, let me give this analysis, and I think that's only half of what you're saying. I think a lot of people, like in Milton, Sandy Springs, and about 9 other cities over the last 10 years, they want control over zoning, they want control over police, and I think that's a big part of it. Now let's all put on our PR hats here. I think the PR campaigns for cityhood just were awful.
Yeah.
And you had the opposition very effectively saying it's a tax hike. Well, nobody likes tax hikes, and so that won the day. Now, the opponents, the old rule is you should answer a tax within 24 to 48 hours in politics, and especially in PR. They never did that. I think there'll be votes again, and I think people still want local control over local affairs. So, you go back to the drawing
Gotta
board.
wrap it there, guys. We're out of time because y'all need time for winners and losers. Stay tuned, everyone.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
All right, Martha, we will start with you first.
Well, first of all, we didn't have time today to talk about the tragedy in Uvalde, but just please no rush to judgment. Let's find out what happened. Let's get it all together, and let's hug the people close to us through all of this. Just a horrible, horrible thing that happened. Of course, my winners this week, Brian Kemp. I mean, he did better than anybody thought. He stayed close to his game, and he went around the state, and he was that Brian Kemp that's been traveling the state for the last 8 to 10 years. And then Kathy Willard. I mean, she was out there early explaining everything that was going on, and I got to tell you, I was happy to see that she was doing such a good job in Fulton County.
All right, Theron.
I want to join Martha and definitely offering my condolences to the families in Buffalo. I wasn't here last week, and also Uvalde. We've got to have a very uncomfortable but much needed conversation about gun violence prevention in this country. We also got to talk about responsible gun ownership. Now, notice I didn't say gun control because that makes the Republicans go a little crazy. But
and mental health.
But mental health is only an aspect of it. We got to get these guns off the street. We have more guns in this country than we do people, and so we got to have a very uncomfortable conversation about that, because the fact that children are being killed in schools, this is the safe place, and we can't ignore this. And I'm not going to allow it to go, unchecked. And so I definitely want to make sure that I definitely offer my condolences. But I'm saying that we should be more outraged. The fact that people are not more outraged about these tragedies concerns me. And then lastly, my winner is the late U.S. Senator Max Cleveland. Because of COVID, because of a lot of different things, had a funeral this past week, and definitely want to thank him for his service.
Phil.
Well, I do agree with you. People should be outraged, and we need to have that discussion. I probably could go down a list, but I won't. Governor Kemp, obviously, Burt Jones. I think it was the year of the incumbent. As I saw it, I think only one incumbent state lawmaker lost, and that was Representative Bonnie Rich. There are some in runoffs, but that certainly was the year of the incumbent. I think Stacey Abrams was a loser. You talk about some goofball remarks. She was trying to say that there's voter suppression in Georgia, and yet we're having record high levels of votes in both the Democrat and Republican primaries. It makes no sense at all. Herschel Walker looks smart compared to that statement.
All right, Melita.
I think it's a cold day when Herschel Walker looks smart compared to Stacey Abrams, Phil, with all due respect. I join my colleagues in condolences for all the families affected by gun violence, and I believe we do need a serious discussion about the kinds of restrictions, because in these states where these high school students buy their guns online and they can buy ammo and assault level weapons easier than they can walk to a bar and have a legal drink, there are a lot of priorities we need to look at as a country. I had Kathy Woolard as my winner of the week. And I also want to offer a shout out to all of the people who lost political races this week from both sides of the aisle, but they managed to issue graceful concession speeches and statements as they acknowledged the will of the voters and congratulated their opponents and called for party unity. That shows a great deal of maturity to behave that way, and not everybody does it.
You know, that's funny you say that, because I did have David Perdue as my winner because he bowed out gracefully. I mean, the numbers tell the story, but he also threw his support behind Brian Kemp, behind the governor.
Unequivocally.
And unlike Stacey Abrams in 2018, who never conceded.
You had to go there, didn't you?
Two more people, if you don't mind. Congresswoman Lou Smith-Bath, definitely want to make her winner. Congressman David Scott, want to make him a winner, and also Congresswoman Nikema Williams. These are all members of Congress. Did I leave out anybody? I think I got everybody who won.
All right. Well, we got to leave it there, so you can do it next week. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.